Canada's Conservatives have forced emergency meetings here in Ottawa today to hold Justin Trudeau to account for a failure to plan for the illegal border crossing crisis that we're seeing at Roxham Road. I'm joined today by my colleague Pierre Poilievre, who has just been doing a phenomenal job in committee holding the government to account. We want to give you an update after the first hour of meetings, and there was a few bombshells.
Well, I'm here to support Michelle, our Shadow Minister of Immigration, who's been asking some very tough questions before the Immigration Committee about these illegal border crossers. So I'm going to reiterate to you some of the questions you've asked, and you can report to your viewers what answers you received.
Yeah.
So you first asked, about this, it's called a safe third country agreement. Now, these are the rules that say that if someone crosses from the United States into Canada and declares refugee status, they can be sent back to the safe place from which they came. That is New York State or Minnesota or North Dakota. And you asked specifically, how long had that agreement between Canada and the United States been in place? And what answer did you get from Ralph Goodale?
Yeah, he said it was some 25 years, and it was actually 2002, and he was in government at the time when the Liberal government signed it. And the context for that question was the Liberals ahead of this they asked some questions about the Geneva Convention. They were trying to make it seem like what the Liberals were doing was, good, and just this complete inability to plan for thousands of people seeking asylum from essentially upstate New York. And so I pointed out the fact that there's an article in the Geneva Convention was actually put in there. It was Article 31. I asked him about that, and he looked at me like he had no idea what I was talking about. But it was put in place specifically at the time to prevent asylum shopping. Now, the Liberals had also asked, they said, look, Ralph, there were thousands of people crossing in 2001, and everything went back to normal. And that's when I asked him, I said, when was the Safe Third Country Agreement signed? He said, well, 25 years ago. I said, well, no, it was 2002, and your former government put that in place to stop what was happening. So, they just contradict each other, and it was, for a minister that is in charge of this to not know those basic facts, I think sort of belied part of the problem that we're facing here.
And now they tell us they're putting a new minister in charge. Well, last week, to great fanfare, the government announced it was bringing in a new minister, Minister Blair from Toronto, former police chief. And he, with his stern face and his policing background, is going to bring order to the border. Mm-hmm. So you asked him, which agencies report to you in this new job, Minister Blair? And what did he say?
None.
Actually, in fairness, he said he's waiting for a letter from the Prime Minister to find out.
Well, and I asked him, I said, point blank, now, one would think that if you were in charge of border security, you would have the RCMP and the Canadian Border Security Agency report to you. Because right now, from a legislative perspective, those agencies have to report to the public safety minister. So now there's a new minister, and I asked him point blank, well, are these agencies going to report to you? And he said no. And then we asked what his job was.
Well, what is your job if you're supposed to secure the border, but none of the border agencies or law enforcement bodies actually report to you? How are you actually supposed to do your job? Which begs the question of whether or not his appointment was merely a public relations gesture by a government that cannot manage the constant flow of illegal border crossers in the amount now of how many?
It's over 31,000.
31,000.
Since January 2017.
Since January 2017. And then you said, you asked, what's going to happen in just over a week when the dormitories, college dormitories,
here's the kicker,
that have 800 illegal border crossers staying in the rooms of students, those border crossers will be evicted so that the students can go back to school. University is coming back, as it always does, same time every year. And Michelle, you asked, where are all of these illegal border crossers going to go when they leave these college dormitories? And what do they tell you?
Well, let me clarify something, Pierre. The government has been saying that they're managing this in an orderly and compassionate manner. putting people into college dormitories for a few weeks because they don't have a plan and then having to evict them, I would not classify as compassionate nor orderly. But the answer that they gave us, that Bill Blair, the new minister without anybody who reports to him, said that they would be putting people up in hotels. And then I asked, well, for how long? And how many? And he couldn't answer that. He did not know. And, so
and
then
who will pay for the hotels?
We don't know.
Is it fair to assume it's taxpayers?
Well, I doubt it's Bill Blair personally.
Right, so they don't know who, they don't know how many, and they don't know who will pay the bills as these illegal border crossers go from college dorm rooms now to hotels. Then I had a chance to ask some questions, and I asked the minister if the rules, he said the rules cannot apply between border crossings. So this loophole has to stay in place, which allows people to cross the border into our country and avoid being returned back to the safe place from whence they came. And he said the reason why we cannot apply the rules right across the entire border, and that we can only apply it at official points of entry, is because if we applied the rules across the border, we'd have to have enforcement agencies at 9,000 kilometers of border space across Canada. So I said to him, you know, Minister Goodale, you are responsible for the RCMP, which enforces traffic rules on thousands of kilometers of Canada's highways. Do we have RCMP officers at every 100 meters along those highways? Of course, he said no. And I said, okay, do the rules still apply when the RCMP and the enforcement body is not there? He said, of course the rules still apply. To which I asked him, if the rules can apply when you don't have enforcement present at every moment, when it comes to traffic laws, why can't the border rules apply at every place in the country, even if we don't necessarily have enforcement there every single minute? And then he said, well, we cannot enforce the rules at the border, across the border. We cannot close this loophole because the Americans will not let us.
The Americans won't let us. And so Pierre and I were sitting beside each other, and I kind of said, I wonder if he asked him. So Pierre goes,
have you asked the Americans if they would have a problem with Canada enforcing the rules between these official points of entry? And Minister Goodale very directly said, no, he had not asked. He's been in the role for 2 years now. He has claimed that he cannot enforce our border rules along the Canada-US border because the Americans won't let him. And when I said, did you ask? He says, no, I haven't had a chance to ask, but I'll get back to you when I finally do.
No, actually, so I heard from one of our communications people that in a scrum afterwards, the media actually pressed him on this point, and his response was, well, I haven't asked because I've been waiting for the Americans to start the conversation.
You've been waiting for the Americans to ask you to ask. That's clear. And you wonder why we have 30,000 illegal border crossers pouring into our country. With this group in charge here in Ottawa, I don't think we can expect any solution soon. In a heartbeat, what are you proposing? You're our lead on this file. How will Conservatives secure our border and restore lawful immigration?
Well, there are many different legislative options, Pierre, that we could pursue to close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement to ensure that we're prioritizing the world's most vulnerable through our humanitarian immigration system. We also need to ensure that we do, when we are accepting humanitarian immigration, that it's done in a planned, orderly way. It's not acceptable for people to be bused to hotels without any sort of budget or plan for doing so. That is not compassionate. The other thing that we would do as a Conservative government is ensuring that people aren't staying in Canada for years on end without having their asylum claims heard. Right now, under this Liberal government, people will be waiting for years to have that asylum claim actually validated. And what that means is that by the Liberal government's own admission, many people that are claiming asylum after coming through Roxham Road won't have valid asylum claims and therefore don't have a legal reason to be in Canada. And we would ensure that people who don't have a legal reason to be in Canada are not in Canada. That seems pretty simple. But there are, what I would say is in recent days, the Liberals have been trying like you've seen this, they've been trying everything to try and silence us on this issue. And we're asking some pretty common sense questions. Where are 800 people going to go? That seems like a fairly reasonable question to ask. And what they've been doing is using some pretty serious language to label people like us, people like you who are asking these questions about the budget. Even the parliamentary budget officer is asking these questions.
But we're all being called nasty names in an attempt to silence the critics of the Liberal failure to protect our borders.
Yeah.
And I think I can speak for us all here on the Conservative team, and this is especially true of my colleague Michelle Rempel. We will not be silenced.
Nope.
We will continue to ask the tough questions. We don't care what phony, false names they try to call us. We will not be intimidated. We have a job to do, and we will do it.
That's right, and you pay our salaries to ask these questions. So I want to thank you, Pierre. Pierre has stepped Pierre, you do so much work on the finance file. He spent nearly 24 hours with me getting ready for this meeting. We were in the office nearly till 10 o'clock last night. And this is important. So we've got another, about 4 hours of meetings or so today. You can tune in live. We can post the link here. And we will be posting clips of the committee meeting later today. We've got a Liberal from Toronto, Adam Vaughan, who is going to be on the hot seat answering questions about housing. And then, of course, we have Trudeau's Immigration Minister, Ahmad Hussein, on the hot seat later today as well. So you can rest assured that we will be asking the tough questions and forcing the government to come up with a plan that is beyond putting people on buses and sending them to hotels for indefinite periods of time. That's not acceptable. Anyway, we're working hard for you in Ottawa, and we should probably get back into those meetings.
Let's get back to the committee.
Working hard for you. Have a great day.